Welcome to Taiwan Brief, news and views about interesting things that impact Taiwan. I'm Donovan Smith in Taichung, Taiwan. All right, in a stunning move, the KMT on Wednesday named former vice presidential candidate and ex-premier Simon Chang, or Zhang Shanzheng, as its candidate for mayor of Taoyuan City. They also announced he'd finally joined the party. Now, no one, and I mean no one, saw this coming, and the backlash has been intense. The internal warfare in the KMT over the Taoyuan nominee was already spectacularly intense and bitter, which I explored in a column on Taiwan News, by the way, entitled Taiwan's Art of Political Knife Fighting on Display in Taoyuan. The presumed candidates previously included KMT legislators Liu Yuling and Lu Mingzhe, as well as former Taipei City Councilor Luo Zhiqiang. All expressed shock and surprise at the KMT's pick. Only one day prior to the announcement, the pan-blue media had been abuzz with stories that an unnamed KMT financier was launching former Kaohsiung mayor and 2020 presidential candidate Daniel Han Kuo-yu into the race. Instead, it turned out to be his former vice presidential candidate, Zhang. In a phone call discussing this issue with the always excellent Frozen Garlic, we both agreed that we thought the KMT was going to go with Lu Mingzhe. He was a bit ahead in the polls, but he had initially downplayed running, noting that he was only halfway through his first term as legislator and only somewhat ahead. However, this is a pretty typical game that Taiwanese politicians play, and was clearly hoping to be wooed and cajoled into running, so he could claim it wasn't his idea, but he'd have to step up if the party asked. He seemed to think that was what was going to happen, and had begun to make comments saying essentially just that. Both Liu Yuling and Luo Zhiqiang had invested heavily in the race. Liu had gotten an endorsement of 486 of the city's 504 borough chiefs, or lijiang. Almost all of her party's city councilors, outside of, I think, 2, and the powerful city council speaker. Liu had been banking on comments by the top leaders in the party that they would choose someone who was doing well in the polls and was acceptable to local leaders. Though she was lagging in the polls compared to Luo Zhiqiang, but behind Liu, party brass had already told Luo they weren't going to choose him as their candidate, including KMT Chair Eric Zhu, or Zhu Liluan, reportedly flat out saying, quote, "I just don't want you, and I'll fight you to the death," to keep Luo from being nominated in a private phone call. And he said that this was regardless of whatever the polls might say about Luo. Luo, however, persisted and essentially declared war on KMT Chair Zhu's leadership in a dramatic showdown that can only be described as epic. And again, check out that Taiwan News article. He resigned from his Taipei City Council seat recently, again, in spite of the party brass saying, "We're not going to choose you," and purchased a home in Taoyuan to move his household registration there in order to continue his run. Liu has spoken to the press and expressed her shock and said, "I can't accept this." She said she was notified by Zhu at the very last minute and felt very disrespected. Worse for Zhu, she has told the press that she is considering leaving the party and running anyway. Her biggest backer, the Taoyuan City Council Speaker, has resigned from all working groups and committees in the KMT in protest at Zhu's nomination choice of Zhang. Luo expressed his shock and disappointment, but kept his comments relatively brief. As he's done in the past, he let his friends and allies express their outrage on his behalf. He's a clever cookie, this guy. Luo has invested everything in this race, and I mean everything, and has previously said he's thought about leaving the KMT, though said he wouldn't at that time, presumably because he was still hoping that he might be chosen as the candidate. It's still very possible that he may decide to do that now, quit the party and run on his own. Though that both he and Simon Chang are protégés of former President Ma Ying-jeou, who reportedly gave the nod to Zhu to pick Chang, could cause conflicting loyalties for him. If both Liu and Luo decide to run anyway, That will split the KMT vote three ways in what was already shaping up to be a complicated three-way race. The DPP will choose their candidate in June, and the TPP, the Taiwan People's Party, has already nominated Lai Xiangling, who has just announced, by the way, that she'll be reaching out to Luo. I'm not exactly sure what she can discuss with him because he wants to run for Taoyuan mayor, and she's already got that for the TPP, but who knows? The vitriol so far has all been directed at Zhu and is coming from party members across Taiwan, including some demanding he step down, one KMT official in Douliu saying he was thinking of leaving the party, and a whole range of outraged comments on Facebook by KMT figures. I even saw today on the TV a local borough chief in Taoyuan talking about he and others weren't going to lift a finger to help get out the vote for Zhang. Well, within Taoyuan, the problem is that Zhu didn't choose one of the active candidates. Around the country, the main complaints were regarding the method and timing of the announcement. Many have called the nomination opaque or even illegitimate. Zhu chose to bypass the standard primary process, which usually involves either negotiation between the candidates or selecting the candidate based on polling results, to simply just go ahead and nominate Zhang. And he got the Central Standing Committee to do it, and apparently Fu Kunqi was instrumental in this, at least according to one report. The party has the right to do this, and both the KMT and the DPP have been using this method a fair bit in this election cycle, but many view it as unfair and lacking in transparency. In this case, Zhu chose to use it in an already very contentious context, making no one happy. Now, Zhu is already a weak chair with plenty of internal opposition, as we've gone into in previous shows. This has added fuel to the fire of internal party opposition. In that conversation with the Froes, we both were confused as to Zhu's behavior. He's acting like he's a strong chairman with the backing of the party, but that just isn't the case. He only barely won the position with a plurality of the vote. He's overseen a string of electoral disasters so far, and he isn't personally popular. Ma Ying-jeou could command the party with a fairly strong hand, but Zhu simply doesn't have a strong hand to play. Does he not realize this? What is going on with him? This whole affair in Taoyuan has been a disaster, as is an ongoing situation in Miaoli I'll probably do a show on in a day or two. So, Zhu's task is to put out the fires, soothe the mountain of egos, and most importantly keep Liu and Luo in the party and on board. If he succeeds at this, the KMT does have a chance to win Taoyuan. So Simon Chang isn't necessarily a bad candidate. Though associated with the Pan-Blue camp for years, his role as a political independent largely kept him off the radar in this political cycle. With the only mention I've seen of him was some chatter of maybe recruiting him to run for Kaohsiung mayor, which has been another ongoing problem for the KMT, but that's for another show. The Ma administration plucked Simon Chang out of the tech world, where he worked for companies like Acer and Google, with much of that time spent working and living in Taoyuan. He served in various high-ranking positions in the administration before ultimately being appointed premier to serve out the lame duck period of Ma's presidency between Tsai Ing-wen's election and inauguration in 2016. In the 2020 race, he was chosen as Dan Han's running mate, mostly seen as a more moderate and technocratic counterweight to Han's deep blue nationalism and tendency for proposing ideas that weren't very technically feasible. That Han, chosen independent, by the way, had precedent. President Tsai's first vice president, Chen Jianren, was also an independent at the time, though he has just recently joined DPP. Zhang has now joined the KMT and will be running in a city he knows fairly well. Taoyuan for years has been led by the KMT, or had been led by the KMT, including 2 terms, by Eric Zhu himself, and the party tends to do fairly well there, such as in the most recent referendums, in spite of twice electing a popular DPP mayor in Zheng Wencan over the last 8 years. So Simon Chang has more experience in executive roles in government than either Luo or Liu, and his business background ties in well with the high-tech direction Taoyuan is moving in. He is fairly unknown as a campaigner, however, with his run for vice president not leaving much of an impact. I'm sure I must have seen him campaign at the time. I couldn't remember anything, and neither could the Froes. Now, of course, keep in mind that Han Guoyu, of course, was very dramatic and pretty much sucked all the oxygen out of the room. By the way, the Froes pointed out something that I hadn't paid much thought to, and that is, in his acceptance comments, Zhang only vaguely said he was doing it to cut the waiting lines for PCR tests. That isn't entirely a local issue, and won't be an issue for much longer, so it's hardly a compelling reason to run. Reportedly, discussions with him had started in early April, so he's had time to chew on his vision for the city. My take when I saw the comments was that he was intentionally keeping low-key considering the shitstorm this was unleashing. But I think the Froes might be right about this. So, all right, back to the race. Much will depend on three factors. First, Zhu needs to keep his own camp from fracturing and sell his party on Zhang as their candidate, which will be no mean feat. Second, the DPP candidate will have a big impact on the race. Suggested names include various legislators and even Health Minister Chen Shizhong. Third is the impact of the TPP candidate, who is lagging in the polls but is pulling enough support she could throw the race to the DPP by siphoning off pan-blue voters, or could even pull ahead if voters view both the KMT and DPP candidates as lackluster. No one knows at this point how much support Zhang has among Taoyuan voters. He was so far off the radar that no polls have included him, and many in the KMT have demanded that Zhu show proof that he has enough support to even justify his nomination. It will be very interesting to see how Taoyuan voters rate him when he's finally included in real polling. And I don't mean that online poll that just came out today. That's pretty iffy. All right, that's it for today's program. I'm Donovan Smith, your host here in Taichung, Taiwan. Tune in next time. More shows coming soon.
Sean here. As you know, we're back. And so far, things have been working really well with our new processes. But we still need your support. Go to patreon.com/Taiwan Report or hit that bell and subscribe button. Most importantly, press those likes, upvotes, what have you, so we can be seen. And don't forget, for more content like this, support us at report.tw.